Throughout history, the diets of soldiers have been dictated not by taste, but by necessity, designed to last, to be carried across vast battlefields, and to provide just enough energy to keep men fighting, no matter how unappetizing the meal. Take hardtack, for example, a simple, rock-hard biscuit made of just flour and water that sustained soldiers for centuries, from the Napoleonic Wars to the American Civil War. This so-called bread was so tough that it could last for years, sometimes decades, without spoiling. But the real problem wasn't its hardness, it was what lived inside it. By the time it reached soldiers, hardtack was often infested with weevils, forcing hungry men to either shake out the bugs or eat them for a little extra protein, a grim reminder that survival often meant lowering one's standards. In fact, Civil War soldiers had a common phrase: if it's moving, eat it fast. If it's not, soak it in coffee first. Yet while hardtack was infamous, it wasn't the only strange food soldiers were forced to rely on. In the early 19th century, pemmican, a dense, high-energy mixture of dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries, was widely used by indigenous peoples and later adopted by European explorers and soldiers alike. Though greasy and unappealing by modern standards, pemmican was packed with calories and lasted for months without refrigeration, making it an ideal ration for long campaigns where fresh food was impossible to transport. Meanwhile, Napoleon's army, which was constantly on the move, needed a more efficient way to carry food, leading to the development of early canned rations. The French government even offered a prize for anyone who could develop a way to preserve food for military use. And in 1809, Nicolas Appert won with his method of sealing food in glass jars, a precursor to modern canning. However, these early canned goods were unreliable, with some cans corroding and spoiling their contents, leading to cases of food poisoning that sometimes caused more casualties than enemy bullets. But while canned food improved logistics, it wasn't always appetizing, and soldiers often preferred fresh meat when they could get it. By the time of World War I, trench warfare meant soldiers needed food that was compact, long-lasting, and easy to prepare in the muddy, rat-infested battlefields of Europe. This led to widespread use of canned corned beef, nicknamed bully beef, which was protein-packed but greasy and often unappetizing, especially when eaten cold straight from the can. Soldiers would spread it on hard biscuits or mix it into stews to make it more palatable, though many still found it revolting after weeks of eating the same thing. Some soldiers even joked that bully beef was more dangerous than enemy artillery. Meanwhile, German soldiers in the trenches had black bread, sausage, and the occasional pea soup with horse meat, if supplies allowed. Then came World War II, where rations became even more specialized, and sometimes even stranger. The U.S. Army introduced the infamous D-ration chocolate bar, which was designed not for taste, but for survival. Unlike the sweet, creamy chocolate we know today, the D-ration was dense, high-calorie, and resistant to melting in hot climates. The problem? It was so tough and bitter that soldiers often avoided eating it unless they were starving. Some described it as tasting like flavored sawdust or glue, but its purpose wasn't enjoyment. It was to keep soldiers alive in extreme conditions. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japanese soldiers primarily survived on rice balls, dried fish, and occasionally canned meat, though many suffered from malnutrition due to supply chain breakdowns. British troops fighting in the deserts of North Africa had to make do with canned mutton and biscuits that were nearly as hard as the hardtack of centuries past. And Italian soldiers in the field were often given dried pasta, olive oil, and preserved vegetables, though they often ran short of supplies. And let's not forget the Vietnam War, where American troops were issued MCI rations, meal combat individual, which included tinned spaghetti, freeze-dried coffee, and the infamous ham and lima beans. A meal so universally hated that soldiers nicknamed it Ham and Mother S. Soldiers in Vietnam also had access to rations with canned fruit, cheese, and even pound cake. But variety didn't always mean enjoyment. Many meals still suffered from blandness or poor quality. Even in modern times, military rations remain a challenge, with MREs, meals ready to eat, providing more variety but still struggling to satisfy soldiers' cravings for real, fresh food. Some MREs include items like beef stew, chicken with rice, or even pizza. But complaints about blandness, odd textures, and digestion issues are common. Some MREs are even self-heating, using chemical reactions to warm food without fire.